Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, Northlight Images, and in this video I'm going to look at things you might think about getting a new camera system for prints. Why do I say for prints? Well, I get asked quite a lot because of all the printers I test, is my camera good enough for making great prints? Now, right up front, I'm going to say that if you have a medium to good camera from the last few years, then it is more than good enough for making great prints. So that may not be the real excuse you're looking for. If you're getting prints that you don't like, then it's almost certainly not due to the printer or the camera or the lens. It's the person doing it. Now that applies to me as well as anybody else, but it's an important consideration before you get too lost in sort of looking at specifications for cameras, lenses, printers and things like that. But with that, I am myself thinking of getting a new camera. The Canon 5DS I've got here, 50 megapixel, has served me well since 2015. I'm wondering about if I could get something that would last a bit longer. Yeah, this will probably keep working for a few years, so there's no rush about it. But what should I look at? Is it time for me to consider switching to a different camera make? Now, people have been doing this all the time, and in general I've always said, think very carefully about it, which is one of the reasons I am. So I'll mention a bit about prints here, but I'll also look at some of my own thoughts as to where I might go and why I would choose some things, and I'm afraid Sony fans are going to be disappointed, why I wouldn't choose some routes as they are at the moment. Now, these prints here, by the way, I'm testing this printer, Epson ET18100. It's a die-based printer, A3 plus 13-inch, so these are 13-inch by 19-inch prints. If you want to make much larger prints like this, then you need a bigger printer. There's a P5000 here, which will do up to 24-inch width. These were printed on a P7500 or 7570, I believe it is in the US. I'm not sure of that number. But anyway, if you want to make big prints, well, that's a different thing really. But these are to many people's requirements, particularly if you're putting them up in a residential environment and on the walls in your house. Then 13 by 19 is a good size. Why did I pick this particular image? Well, it's one I've just been testing here on this, the 18100. These two papers are some of the... This is a printer for glossy photos, produces great glossy photos. And I'll have a review in due course of it and looking at more. But these are matte papers. The range of matte papers it works with is relatively limited because they have to be quite light and thin. If you put high quality thick art papers through this, it prints really well. Unfortunately, it leaves marks, roller marks on the prints that you can see, and that just causes problems. Even with Epson papers, I've tried this, but that's hardly a surprise because there is no art media setting in the settings for this printer. It is what it is, but very nice prints these mate. This is in Colorado, looking over towards the Great Sand Dunes National Park. There is a storm coming in. And what I've always liked about this picture is it just picks the first flash of colour in the sagebrush that you've got round here, the sagebrush, and also in these cottonwood trees, just first leaves coming out. You can still see all the branches, but you've got leaves just appearing, so they have a nice greenish tinge to them. This was taken in 2004. It was taken on an 11 megapixel Canon 1DS. I mentioned that to say that before you start using, as I said, my prints aren't good enough, bear that in mind when we start talking about megapixels. The lens that's used was this very lens here. It's a Canon EF7200 f2.8 LIS, so image stabilized. This is taken handheld, this particular shot here. That is the original lens I had in 2004. It's still going strong. If it were to break, I think it might be difficult getting it repaired these days, but it's a good lens, and for the uses I have for it, and this is one of those things you need to think about, for the uses that you have for a particular lens, this one works a treat still. I have no difficulties with it. Do I want a new one? No. This one cost me 1,400 quid. Yes, it's paid for itself many times over. But back to the cameras. There's quite a rush of new cameras forecast at the moment, and yeah, it's picked up interest, and people are looking, well, you know, what am I going to get? If you're going to get something that, you know, will last you for a good few years. These cameras are expensive if you want the good ones. You know, a few £1,000 is a lot of money. Well, it certainly is to me. And I'm not going to buy a new camera on a whim, so there's going to be quite a few things. What cameras am I currently considering? Well, because of the Z mount and my experiences when testing the PCE 19, PCE 24 lenses, the Nikon Z7 Mark II at 46 megapixels, okay, it's a 2020 camera, that is on my list. That means also that the impending Z8, which should be announced fairly soon, which is really going to be the mirrorless version of the D850, which superb camera. I'm going to say that the Z8 is a contender. Now, I'll come back to lenses in a moment, but that's, you know, I don't want less megapixels than this. I'm used to using 50, 46, whatever, makes no real difference. So we've got the Canon R5, I could think of that. Now, that's also a 2020 camera. There's no sign on the horizon yet of an R5 Mark II. And the rather lackluster pixel shift, which I would use for some things, for macro and some other items and some product photography. The pixel shift on the R5, that was rather lackluster and disappointing. So I would be waiting for an R5 Mark II. No sign of that. That's, I'm going to say, a year away until you could get one. That's a maybe. Larger cameras like, yeah, the R3, or even the, you know, the fabled R1 when it eventually turns up. No, I don't have a use for that sort. If you want that sort of camera, then you'll know why you want that sort of camera. So I've got two there. The Canon one, yes, well, Canon, I've got Canon lenses, but they're all EF mount. The shift lenses I use a lot, because I'm an architectural industrial photographer, the shift lenses I use a lot can be adapted. What can they be adapted to? Well, they can be easily adapted to Nikon. I've got an adapter, I've used that before. They can be used, obviously, with an RF to EF adapter, so I've used them on an R5 and tested them. Worked very well there. Then we come to the one that perhaps 6 months ago I wouldn't have considered, the GFX 100S from Fuji. Having tested it, in particular having tested it using adapted lenses, Canon lenses, I'm thinking it's rather nice. Now, even if I just use the lenses in crop mode, if the image circle's not big enough, then I've still got 60 megapixels out of it. And my processing of the files, certainly compared to this, much better than this in many respects. Certainly in dynamic range and shadow detail and things like that, which I do notice in photographing buildings. Yeah, that's better than this. Add to the fact that I can use the full frame of it, the full small medium format, 33 by 44 sensor. I can use that with these lenses and get 102 megapixel images. Yeah, that's interesting. My only concern is that the mount, the G mount, the depth between the mount and the sensor means that I won't easily, I don't see a way around this one, be able to adapt forthcoming Canon EF mount, RF mount camera lenses to Fuji. Is that a problem? Well, no, not at the minute, but Canon is switching its lens line over, but that's going to be expensive. When, if they bring out new RF mount tilt shift lenses, yeah, that's going to be interesting, and I'll look at those and think, oh, they're nice. But what I've got is already pretty good. Certainly good enough, works on the 100 megapixel. I said, look at something you can use for years to come. I don't see if I was to get one, you know, any of these cameras, they would last me a good few years. I'm at a point where, whilst nominally I can consider retiring in a few years, I doubt I probably will, but nominally I have to consider this from a business point of view, particularly doing the architectural industrial photography that I do. So yeah, I'm quite interested here in seeing what the GFX would do to replace this. That's still on my book. I've not mentioned Sony. And I'm afraid I'm dismissing Sony out of hand because of the E-mount. When they decided that was going to be their mount for going forward. Now, with E-mount lenses, you can adapt them onto other cameras and they work very well because they're designed for that small sensor, the small mount. You can't easily get a 35mm or 36 by 24mm sensor in the space for the E-mount, and it's always seemed to me a needless constraint. Maybe knowing Sony, they might change their mind next year and suddenly go back to a version of the other larger mounts, but not at the moment. It means, for example, that if I was to try and use adapted lenses like this, I'm going to get mount vignetting. I can't easily use any of the new lenses for the larger mounts on it. Just a few problems. So it's nothing particularly against the cameras specification wise. They look nice, but you just pick the wrong mount for my usages. Now, I'm sure there are many people happy using Sony lenses, happy with their cameras. That's good for them. That's what you should look at, what's good for you. But for myself, no. I've got to think about what I'm going to use for work, because that's what pays for it in the end. And it comes down to it, which of these ones will first serve me for my work? Well, actually several of them will. And secondly, I want to make big prints. They'll all do that as well. So in a way, I'm saying there is no easy choice here, but be very careful at the moment if you are thinking of changing from one system to another. Look at the longer term implications. Look at what lenses you can use. Look at what lenses you've got, whether they're good enough. I got this lens in 2004 and here we are 19 years later and it is a perfectly usable lens. This lens was from 2007. We'll carry on. Spend your money on lenses. I've said this many times before. Get the best lenses you can. Cheap lenses, yes, but they're the sort of things that you will, when you get good enough, you'll quickly realise their deficiencies. Go for better lenses if you can afford it. And the cameras will catch up to some extent. So there we go. What am I thinking of at the moment? Well, there's a possibility. Z8, I'll have a look at what it looks like. Of course, being a brand new camera, it won't be available for a while. It will be expensive. So Z8 and adapters is a consideration for me. An R5, yeah, there's just, the shine has worn off Canon stuff a little bit for me. May not for you. It has some very good features. I'm not seeing the R5 Mark II anytime. And the Sony, well, no, not with the E-mount. That just restricts what I can do far too much for what I want to do. So I hope those sort of meanderings are of some interest in the considerations of anyone that's thinking of getting a new camera, a new lens, or to go back to another printer. I can produce great from this printer. I could use my old Canon 1DS Mark III, which dates from 2007. I could use that and produce great looking prints at this size. Don't fool yourself that you actually need it. It's your skills that probably count the most in the prints. But I like every so often printing off older images like this. And this hasn't even been reprocessed since the original. So this processing is a 2005 file that I've printed off. I can see a few aspects of it in the prints that I might go back to the raw file and redo it if I was going to be doing a proper print of it. But it works. That. Think carefully how you spend your money. Appreciate any thoughts people have got on this. Yeah, always interested to hear what people say. It's people asking me these questions that make me think about it and make me think of it a little bit more widely. So thanks for watching. Please do subscribe to the channel and thank you.